Comic Hour with your host, Andrew Launer.
And Chris Ramos.
Tonight, we are reviewing Gotham Central by Ed Brubaker, Greg Rucka, with art by Michael Lark.
And others.
And a few others, yes.
Yeah.
We're really excited to share this review with you all because this is a non-traditional Batman-centric world in Gotham City, and it's more told through the police and the detectives' perspectives.
Yeah, the G.C.P.D.
Yes, and the unsung heroes.
That was
City.
like, it's always like this background thing that that always rolls into Batman, and you try to figure out like where do they have a place in Gotham? Like, are they running Gotham or are they ruining Gotham? Or, does Batman trust them? Do they trust Batman?
Yeah. And it's not really that they trust him. They just don't want Batman taking credit for all the hard work and investigating and building up the case and then trying to go apprehend somebody. And then all of a sudden Batman, gets the perp, he saves the day, and all their hard work was like, we can't do anything with it.
And there's so many parts in here because this has 10 or 12 different storylines. I mean, it actually kind of jumps through quite a bit, so you get sort of all angles, but pretty consistently it's almost like they start an investigation or they find a body or something.
Yes.
Right? So they're like, well, here's a body, let's do the police thing and let's do all that we're supposed to, SOP kind of stuff. And they lock off the crime scene and they do all this. And then they turn around and like Batman's there and he's like, leave it alone, I'll figure this out.
Yeah.
Well,
that's our job.
And then, so as cops, they're like, well, we still have to do our part. But then it just turns into them after a time and time of that happening.
Right.
It turns into them just saying, I'll forget it. Then if Batman's going to do it, then forget it. So then they start just sort of like, on one hand, kind of hating their job. Yes. And on the other hand, kind of hating Batman.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I would too. I mean, at some point you're like, we did all that work. And also, it's that classic age-old tale of like, does Batman or the superhero of the time create the villains, or does the villains create the superhero?
Yeah.
It's that, chicken or the egg kind of argument.
Well, and what I really, really love about Gotham Central, first of all, this is my second time reading it. It was easily one of my favorite reads at the time when I first sat down with it. The premise is really, really exciting to me of just like, this is sort of Law and Order. And,
CSI, all your classic like investigative TV shows.
And it came out around the time of when those shows were really gaining in popularity.
Yeah, actually, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
What was this? 2004.
2004. It starts. Yes. Yeah.
2004 through 2009.
Yeah.
So you got a good 6-year run. There's 40 issues. So it's a really great, collection, and it definitively ended. So it was nice to see this arc of like Ed Brubaker and Greg Rucka writing a completed 40-issue run and then just being like, we're done, we're cool with this.
Right.
That's what it is.
Yeah. And it's almost told in an anthology style where it flows together, but also you could take any story and read it on its own too, for the most part.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So there was all sorts of different jumping on points, and in some cases they did have like previously this is what happened, so that way maybe say when it was coming out you could just pick it off the shelf and kind of get into it a bit.
Yeah, and like some of them were a 3 or 4 issue run, maybe, right? Like
3. I think 4.
So.
I think the 4-part was like the longest it got.
Yeah.
Which is kind of nice because then you get to change different perspectives, different characters, because usually it's a cop and their partner. And so it's, you can kind of, ground yourself in 2 characters going through this case and developing what their personalities are like.
And, so it starts out actually I think the opening issue.
Yeah, we were talking about this in the pre-show. If you don't stick this beginning of this book, it's really hard to figure out what the tone is.
Yeah.
And just to figure out like what's the driving force, what's the narrative and things like that. So they did a really good job of collaborating together, Rucka and Brubaker, to figure out how can we get this book started. And so it kind of, I think we're just going to jump into it. So it involves 2 detectives, and they're out on investigation. They find out, one of their perps is in this apartment, and they're going in to investigate, and they're supposed to find this like mob boss or a middleman or something like that.
And they're like really ground level. Like that's what I like
Yes.
about it. It's just like a dirty old apartment. They're both just wearing
Yeah.
suits. You know, you could tell they're detectives, but it's just like the coloring of the book is really plain. I mean, nothing at first
Yes.
seems too sensational. Like
Hmm.
you wouldn't think of this as a quote unquote superhero book.
Right.
It was mostly like a true crime novel kind of
Yes.
thing.
And so they're kind of doing this back and forth, and it says, "Oh, you got a warrant? If we had a warrant, do you think we'd be asking? Just open the door, Danny. Who is that, sir? Sir, step back from the." And then they're like, "Oh no!" And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, Mister Freeze, in all of his glory and infamy,
Yeah.
open, kicks down the door and shoots one of the cops and freezes like their arm and kind of upper waist side, to the point where, if you get like attacked by Mr. Freeze with his freeze gun, you're not really coming back.
Well, and like that's the thing too. So you have Mr. Freeze, who's a pretty big villain for decades in the
Yeah.
Batman comics, right? And a lot of times it's the comics are told from Batman's side of it, or you just see Mr. Freeze, doing something at a large scale. You
Mhm.
don't usually see him just in an apartment building,
No, it's
like
so ordinary.
yeah, and they're just kicking into the hallway and just blasting people. The
Yeah.
way that it's drawn too is like exactly like we were saying. The officers just fall over. I mean, they're just
Yeah.
like they don't know what to do.
No.
And even though he kind of looks like
Yeah.
an old man in like a glass spacesuit, it's still
Yeah.
like he's still um
A pretty big tier villain.
what am I thinking of? His reputation,
Yes.
I think, is what they immediately are like, this is too much for us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it kind of goes, Charlie, you okay? And then Mr. Freeze goes, no, I'm afraid okay isn't a word Charlie would be using any longer.
Yeah, because his partner, he froze him solid head to toe.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, actually. And
Yeah.
it was like, okay, his partner, his hand and his foot, and they were able to eventually save that part of him, but still that was quite extensive, and it was just like it was a big like kick in the face for them. They're like, whoa,
Yeah.
okay, I kind of freaked out.
And
So
Mr. Freeze starts breaking pieces of the guy who's frozen solid. and,
yeah, just in
going
case,
around.
like, oh, you thought you could thaw him out, save the day. Nah, no, I ain't doing that. And then they go on to figure out like why was Mr. Freeze there? Who
Mhm.
was he after? What
'Cause
was
they
the motives?
Yeah, they told him too. They're like, we weren't even here looking for you. We're looking for some kidnappers.
Yeah.
And Mr. Freeze is like, well, today's your bad luck
Yeah.
day then. It's like, so I immediately you get the idea that yes, these are cops doing their beat and they're sort of doing their investigations. And at any time they could run into a super villain.
Yeah.
And
Right?
how are they prepared for it?
They're not.
They're not armored up. This isn't like, they're walking around as SWAT team. None of them are super powered.
Yeah.
It's just literally what you would imagine
Yeah.
a
Detective Driver was the survivor.
yeah,
Yep.
a DCU or whatever, or MCU, sorry,
Yeah. Major
Unit.
Crimes Unit. Yeah. We later on they kind of really distinguished the difference between Major Crimes Unit and then the rest of the police force.
Yes.
Let's wait it later on. We'll touch on that. But yeah, so you kind of go really start out the gate of just figuring out like, oh, these are just ordinary people in Batman's world.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like Gotham City is Batman's world.
Yeah.
And everyone has a part or a play in
Yeah.
it. But their role is either very simple or,
Yes.
corrupt or still
Yeah.
trying to do good or just kind of over it all, and there's a lot of people that do that. But this goes back to now that they had this major run in with Mr. Freeze and he's made a wreck of the whole apartment there. Now they just sort of are handling it on their own. And what do they do? And you kind
Yeah.
of, you're introduced to two of the main characters,
Mhm.
Renee Montoya
Toya.
and
Chris
Crispus Allen.
Yes. And they were absolutely some of the standout stars for this. Even though all the characters had plenty of shining moments, those two are the ones they were like, we can tell the story of Gotham Central easily through these two characters.
Yeah. And Renee, so we were kind of talking about this a little bit. So Renee Montoya was introduced in the Batman animated series. That was her first um, appearance,
Yeah.
and Bruce Timm created her for the animated series. I think just to give, he wanted a lot of those female roles, and he just wanted to
Yeah.
have like another stronger like police officer. Um, there's been a lot of TV shows, including Brooklyn Nine-Nine,
Oh, okay.
that have based their character on Renee Montoya.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah,
know
so
that. That's cool. Okay.
she's an inspiration for just sort of that, like, sort of tough detective
Yeah.
girl.
Absolutely.
Um,
Or not traditional detective
right,
too.
right.
Yeah. So yeah, she was super interesting to figure out. Definitely a complex character, and they keep adding more and more to her, and keep really putting through a lot of trials in the ringer. Just not giving her too many breaks, I should say. But yeah, and then one of the other characters I found was Sarge. He was the very like old school cop who were trying to deal with new traditional ways. He was really cool. We mentioned in our pre-show that we were trying to establish the timeline of when this takes place.
Hmm.
So you mentioned this was
Yeah.
right after No Man's Land,
Yes.
that saga.
After No Man's Land.
Can you give us like the skinny on that one?
So No Man's Land was an earthquake had hit Gotham City, um, and the whole city kind of fell into
Yeah.
disarray. The police did what they could. Batman did what he could. Arkham Asylum was like emptied. Sort of all the typical stuff that you see in like a Batman thing of like total anarchy everywhere, right?
Okay.
So then once the city was sort of decimated, they had to like rebuild,
Hmm.
and that's a good way for comics to say, hey, we're gonna introduce new characters. So we're going to
Yeah, absolutely.
rebuild. We're not just going to put everyone back in the same place they were before.
Yeah.
And some of the older police officers, including Gordon
Yeah,
and they,
that was the big thing
yeah,
when you start this book and you kind of start reading about the characters, like, oh, there's no James Gordon.
no,
Like Batman's like, guy from the police force that the Commissioner Gordon, one of his close friends, endearing people,
well,
it's
and
gone.
that's the other part of it too, is a lot of times, like when you read comics, and a character sort of loses their powers for a while, like, okay, Superman has kryptonite now,
Yep.
he doesn't have his powers, or Green Lantern loses his ring, or anyone kind of like they take that one thing they have. So for Batman, a lot of that is, um Batman loses Alfred, or
Yeah.
Batman loses Gordon,
Sure.
and he has a lot of people that sort of are support characters for him.
Hmm.
So in this comic, it is pretty cool that the GCPD is just a bunch of still seasoned officers, but also just,
Yes.
straight laced cops. But you get this weird feeling too that some of them are kind of like slimy and corrupt. And,
Sure.
you just like feel like that. But then, you realize that Batman doesn't really have a good relationship with any of
No,
them.
I think the closest ones he have were the characters we mentioned earlier of Christmas Allen
Yeah.
and Renee Montoya.
And even then, it's sort of kind
Kind of their
of.
colleagues, maybe
Yeah.
not close, friendship or anything like that.
And then this is before, well, this is right when Robin went to Bloodhaven.
Bloodhaven, yes.
Bloodhaven.
There's a story that talks about that too.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
I looked that up too. I was like, how far is Bloodhaven from Gotham? And Bloodhaven's 30 minutes from Gotham. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So like, it's close enough, right?
Sure.
And for those of you who don't know, when Robin sort of wanted to grow beyond the Teen Titans and sort of grow out beyond like Batman's shadow, so to say, he wanted to be his own superhero and his own
Yes.
person. So he is the main protector of a city called Bloodhaven.
Yeah, so that would have been Dick Grayson.
Yes.
And then there was, I think Jason Todd was probably Red Hood by now, or it was going to be.
Yeah, I would imagine that's right.
Yeah, or that's what they were planning.
And they kind of kept it a little ambiguous.
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Could have been Tim Drake, because we didn't get to what's Batman's son, Damian. We didn't.
No,
Yeah, Damian's not established.
this
yet.
is pre-Damian.
Yes. So that was kind of like there's a Robin story that we'll get to later, but it doesn't really establish like which Robin it is, so it is a little ambiguous.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool.
Well, and you kind of just, as the stories continue, you do get these really small touches of supervillains and superheroes. You
Yes.
get the idea that they live in that world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they have glimpses of them in the sky or something.
Right.
But that's one of the storylines that a lot of comic writers put in there, that even though they live in a city, even in Metropolis, they live in Metropolis, the city of tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And occasionally they'll think, "Oh, I think I saw a red blur in the sky."
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
think I
Yeah.
saw Superman.
Superman. Yeah.
So you don't. It's not like everyone every day is just constantly bombarded with superheroes,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of a nice way to put it,
Yeah.
and certainly not Batman. And this story does jump between like the day shift and the night shift,
Yes, we were
so
talking about
that's kind
that.
of a cool touch on it all, where you get
Yeah,
the idea.
especially like I don't know, it's got to be hard, or at least coming up with like a collaboration book, working together with another writer to write a script. You got to be really probably on the same page, or either working ahead,
Yeah,
or trying to come up with like a cohesive story that you both can agree on. I mean, yeah, they're probably good friends, and that's why they decided to work together. But still, it's got to be hard.
yeah. Well, and if you just sort of randomly flip through it too,
Yeah.
it's mostly all of them standing in the police station a lot.
Oh yeah,
Like,
absolutely. That's one of the big settings.
it's a lot of the banter of that.
Hmm.
And the characters themselves, um, drawn by Michael Lark. There's pluses and minuses to his artwork.
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
were talking about that a little bit. Like, how would you describe it? Like, just on its own?
um, I would say it's like really sketchy, like,
Yes.
but sketchy like with a marker. Not
Yeah,
like,
that's good. That's a good
not like
feeling to it.
real
Yeah.
pencily sketchy.
Yeah.
It's mostly like quick shapes and quick ideas, like, dude, this guy has a mustache. Boom, boom. This guy has glasses.
Right.
Dude, this girl has blonde hair. And if you consistently try to find them, sometimes just the coloring gets lost a little bit.
Right. Yeah, they're very muted.
So
Like, yeah.
the main characters like
Red and orange are like the big standout
yeah,
colors.
and like Crispus is bald, has a goatee,
Yeah.
African American. So you're like, okay,
Yeah.
I know him all the time.
Right.
But some of the other
Yeah.
characters
Between
are
him and
hard to pull
Sarge.
out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think, what did I count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. There's over like 25 characters, there's like 23, 24 characters. And so we were talking about, he does a good job of making them stand out on their own. But, we were talking about this like artist fatigue with
Mhm.
it, where after about 30 issues, 25 to 30 issues, you almost need something or different art just to break it up a bit. And just to kind of leave it on its own, just kind of palette cleanser
Yeah,
a
and
bit.
it does kind of blend together because there's just lots of faces.
Yes.
There's just you're really close up all the
Yes.
time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
That's good.
you don't want to fall into the trap sometimes when you're reading comics for such a long time where you jump from text bubble to text bubble to text bubble,
Sure.
and you kind of like lose the art. You're just trying to like read it like almost like a novel. So you're like, I'm just going to read the text, text,
Yeah.
text, and you don't want to lose
Like a prose. Yeah.
yeah, you don't want to lose that, and
Yeah.
that's why I think when the supervillains appear and they kind of
Yeah.
add that
a
excitement
pop.
a little
Yes.
bit, yeah. So like in here they have Mad Hatter was cool.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mad Hatter's
Ship.
he has what was he was in jail, and
Yeah.
they found his hat, and his
Yeah.
hat has mind control.
Yep. Hypnosis
Yeah.
powers. Yep.
And
You come to find out there's actually 2 hats. One was accounted for and one wasn't. And
yes,
so they're like, well, where's the hat? And that was like a huge deal. And they kind of do a great balance of putting ordinary characters that maybe you wouldn't think of them as a villain, but then they turn out to be a villain, or just get, in the wrong place at the wrong time deal. Absolutely. And
Joker's in it.
Joker is in it. So
Joker is so
yeah, and
wacky.
I would say that was probably the most terrifying like story, honestly. I know we've read a lot of Joker stories in our time. Obviously, Killing Joke is one of the huge ones. But when they finally do that story, it was like not a typical Joker story. And even if that's such a phrase, but
Yeah.
he's like a sniper.
Well,
A sniper on Chris and it's during Christmas season too. That was a whole thing because
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the way I looked at that was, what do supervillains do on their like
holiday.
off days?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, you know, okay, the way that Batman is written is that the supervillains are always hatching plans. Um, and Batman sort of finds those plans and tries to either stop them or bring them to justice, right? So when the Joker is in
Yeah.
this,
Soft targets. That was the
yeah,
name of the
soft
storyline.
targets. I mean, what
Yeah.
a title too. So the Joker, yeah, just starts like sniping people,
Yeah. And
and
they don't even know it's
no,
Joker.
no, and it's totally random,
Yeah.
and
And
it's
he's going
like,
through like all the like a lot of these higher ranking like public officials.
yeah, and he's not the scary like torn up like Snyder
Yeah.
Joker. He's just almost like a classic Joker of just like classical, like he's straight up serial killer in Gotham. And Batman um makes more of an appearance in this, but at the same time you
Yes.
can see where the police after a while they're like, we don't even know what to do right now. Like
Yeah.
they kind
They
of
were
get
kind
to
of
a stale.
scrambling. They were trying to get the whole city on almost the lockdown or trying to get everyone as safe as they can or putting out warnings or trying to inform the city that this is a thing. The only reason they know it's Joker is because when they would go to where they figured out where the sniper was, he left a laptop with some sort of like joke on it saying like boy butler or something, superintendent of whatever, some silly like cartoony thing gag, and it was like, what? Okay then. Or so, one of them was like the Joker left his symbol saying Batman come get me, and yeah, who wears Joko?
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
And by
And
the time that they figure out it's Joker, it's like they almost want to say, "Okay, Batman, figure it out."
yeah,
Like they at that point, they don't like Batman. They don't want to use him
yeah,
as a member of the police department, and that's
right,
where they're trying to um
stand on their own their
yeah,
work.
they're trying to make this line of like Batman is a vigilante, and that's always been their story, because
Yeah,
as soon as they start embracing Batman, then they're sort of encouraging this uh, extra violent way of doing
sure,
things.
and they're discrediting their police force.
Yes,
Yeah.
and telling people like, "Hey, do what you want," but in the end,
It's
we're
a
gonna
Batman.
it's a
Yeah.
Batman thing.
Yeah.
So then they have their intern,
Yeah, Stacy.
Stacy.
Yes.
So I think Stacy is one of the standout characters. So
Absolutely. She's a great foil for the team of just being kind of the outsider, the brand new person kind of looking in.
she's like early 20s, maybe,
Oh,
or
yeah.
maybe 19. I don't
Hmm.
know. But yeah, so she is there. She really runs around, gets people coffee, and like does that kind
Yeah,
of stuff.
answer
And
the
then,
phones, gets
yeah.
people where they need to go.
And if they ever want to turn on the bat signal, which is still on the roof, the police department is not allowed to turn it on, because then they're again going back to saying that they accept Batman's
Yes.
methods.
Yeah, because it's like between her and the commissioner, and it was kind of like getting everybody on the same page, like, okay. And when the cops or somebody on the team would be like, no, we're just gonna get Batman to do it.
Yeah.
I think it was during the Joker
Yeah,
storyline,
yeah.
actually,
Like,
where they're just like, no, we don't got time. We gotta get some more now.
all right, turn the signal on.
What?
And so they send Stacy up to the roof to turn the signal on, because she's an unpaid, off the payroll,
Yeah.
not part of the GCPD. She's just this random person that works, or that's just there. So she has no affiliation to the police department. So they have to tell her to turn on
Yeah.
the signal, which is great.
Right. And yeah, and just all the stories, a lot of them end, especially the Joker one or the Mr. Freeze one, they just end on a very untraditional way or some unexpected way. Like Joker turns himself in and he just kind of he kind of starts tearing the police force from like the inside out.
Well, yeah, and like, I mean, it's good to note that the way that Brubaker writes, um, and Greg Rucka, I guess, is that they're not trying to tie everything into a perfect bow, and they're not trying to like
Yeah.
give a happy ending to
Hmm.
anything. They're, if anything, they're showing that Gotham has no happy endings.
Yes.
And so when there introducing these, there's no like final resolution. It's just sort of like, this is what happens. This is what these people deal with.
Yep.
It shows them like, you know, the detectives going back to their home at night and just being like sad and
Yeah.
depressed and like, what did I do today kind of thing.
Hmm.
And then either Batman shows up and it sort of ends, or they just kind of dissolve and the villains move on with their life and the other guys move on with their life. It's like, it's just what happens.
Absolutely.
It's like a tornado, you know, it just
Right.
tornado comes in and you're just left with the pieces afterwards.
Sure. Now, the feeling of the book still is in and graphic novels like a crime noir story,
Yeah.
but it's more of a modern setting in this Gotham Central setting, so it kind of is more grounded in that world. So I really enjoyed that. Another one of the creepy stories that you encounter is like Harvey Dent. Harvey Dent has
Yes.
this creepy crush.
Yeah.
on one of
Two-Face
them.
was really good in it. I really
Yeah.
liked that.
Because he still tries to appeal to his humanity and everything. Everybody always tries, but
Mhm.
no, he just becomes a psycho.
Well, and like one
Very
thing that
crazy.
stood out to me was, the way that Two-Face acts when he's like, when Two-Face is versus like a person, or when Two-Face is like versus Batman.
Yes.
Like it's totally different.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
maybe Two-Face isn't really like, you look at Joker and Two-Face, they're not really like strong individuals, they're
Yeah.
not. I mean, I think Two-Face is a pretty
Average.
decent
Yeah.
average guy, right? But like it's the unpredictability of them that
Yes,
really
absolutely.
people don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, because he doesn't really have multiple personality disorder, but it's just something that triggers him, and he'll just go off the deep end,
Yeah, he's
or
like
is like scheming in the way he does about it because he's almost in that mafia
he's like
style.
0 to 100 like in
Yeah,
a split second. And if you're
absolutely.
not always on guard, it's like you don't realize what's happening.
Hmm. They kind and yeah, so and they kind of do different types of like detective stories. They do a cold case story called Unresolved, which was really heartfelt and everything. Of just here's this cold case story.
Hmm.
This detective wants to kind of wants to like resolve it, revisit it because of just case like they went through a lost and found and they're like, oh hey, what's this in here, okay, where did this come from,
Yeah.
and just kind of putting the pieces of this tragedy that happened like a decade ago and bringing some new perspectives to it.
You
That
know,
was really a really good but like
and
hit
that
home
was
kind
good.
of
And
a
that's about
story.
halfway through the run. And what I really did enjoy was, I think, if Brubaker was laying out this 40 issue arc, well, first of all, I
Yeah.
bet they didn't know they were going to do 40 issues. But
No.
if he was sort of saying, okay, first we're going to start with the Mr. Freeze, then we're going to move into this next one where it's intrusive, and then we're going to go back over to the Joker, then we're going to come back to it's it's like the stories are connected but not, but at the
Yes.
same time you have sort of these quiet moment stories in between the really graphic ones, right?
Yeah.
So I think in that sense it was purposeful.
Yeah.
But they probably were like, hey, let's write a story about, how Batman meets the commissioner. They don't get along really well. Like, let's bring
Sure.
him down to that. Let's bring him
Absolutely.
up to the.
Or you could think about it from the reverse of like how would this super over the top villain affect an ordinary person?
Yeah.
Yeah, from that perspective too.
Yeah. I mean, there's almost 1,000 pages in this Omni, and I think Batman's in like 20 pages.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what everyone
he's
says.
kind of like the elephant in the room.
Yes. Like, he's out there.
He's out there. How is he going to get involved, or is he going to get involved? And if he is, how much is he going to get involved?
And when he shows up, like I'm
It's
looking at,
purposeful.
yeah, and he like still freaks them all out. He still is like scary, and it is funny because they're all in suits, and then you have Batman literally standing there in this cowl and cape, and it's drawn the way that the artwork is like drawn that he's pretty kind of a spooky guy, like
Yeah.
okay, like all of a sudden he's just sort of this brooding
Right.
thing
Especially
right there.
when Michael Lark draws him because he has like a shadow.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
literally like his cape like covers almost his entire body, and he's like the shadow in the room.
And he's just this giant man standing there. Just
Yeah,
like,
not creepy at all. And from the flip side of things, you're like, oh, that's a actually a great perspective for it. He's just this like huge shadow in the room, and he's either gonna be interfering or he's just gonna sit there and watch you tell a story. And he's like, okay, then I'm going to
And then
go.
jump in when you're wrong.
Yep.
You're wrong.
Absolutely. Another issue Greg Rucka and Ed Brubaker wanted to tackle was, again, coming back to Renee Montoya, is establishing what her, going more investing in the character, giving her more background and stuff. And turns out she is a gay cop. She's a lesbian.
Hmm.
And so but she doesn't tell that. It's leaked to the media. It's leaked to her family. It's leaked to her
Yeah.
her
Two
cohorts
Face.
in the GCPD. And somebody giving that up and telling you your story like that, it was very hard for her, and her parents didn't really accept her for that. So it was this like, how do you deal with that? How do you move on? Or who leaked it? And that was a whole thing too.
Well, and she's a decade into being a cop,
Yeah.
and she was still really nervous about even talking to her parents about it, and they kind of broke away and started telling that story, which was outside of the police department, but also a kind of a nice break to really ground her as like
Hmm.
a human being kind of thing.
Yes.
And it was kind of nerve wracking, and
Hmm.
it was a little tense because you're just like, this is a big moment here, and they're
Yeah.
taking time in a comic to take take the time to tell the story, and that's
Yeah.
really nice to give her some pages.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell that human. It's a very human story,
Yeah.
and this was back in like 2004, 2005 era, so it wasn't like a big thing like the DC universe or even comics like embraced right away. So it was just kind of, I think it was pretty groundbreaking for them to do it, establish that
Well,
story.
and so I think it was really nice that they put it in there. That wasn't just like a tool that they said, "Aha, let's put this," and now the whole
Absolutely.
story is going to change. They didn't do that, and they didn't put it in as some sort of like vengeful moment or anything like that. Like they still paid a good amount of justice to that topic.
Absolutely. And they
Um,
revisit her and her girlfriend.
yeah, a few
And
times.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And they grow in a better relationship with Christmas Allen and his wife. And they kind of bond over that, that detective life and living with them, out on the streets, and how do they deal with it at home. And when something happens, I was like, whoa, okay, they're there for each other. So you get this relatability, and you can kind of invest in those characters.
yeah, and as much as the supervillains are making havoc, and there's quite a few times where some of the stories just ended as, well, this is Gotham, it's just what it is. So you do kind of like constantly get this sort of bummer of a, man,
Yeah.
it's Gotham. Well, then Renee's story kind of, you start rooting for some of these characters. So
Yeah.
you're like, hey, it's Gotham, but look, you guys are doing all right,
Hmm.
and uh Brubaker has a really good way of
Yeah.
building up characters, and so you
Sure.
start rooting for them, and then of course he just like breaks them down. But that's just part of good storytelling too.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see how much like one put into the other, or how much collaboration, or what that process was like. Um
Between the two of them.
yeah,
Between,
absolutely. I know like some of them like did their own solo series or solo stories in here. But collaborating and like, hey, this is what I'm gonna do here, this is what I'm gonna do here. And we talked about that day night shift kind of balance. And
yeah.
yeah, it was super cool. They introduced a new commissioner, which he had to figure out how to. He was kind of like this really tough guy, and no nonsense, and trying to figure out when to be flexible and not. And it's like, oh, I'm going to be the straight laced cop. He's like, oh, it's gonna be a little hard.
Yeah.
So that was super interesting.
Well, and he takes down the bat signal.
Yeah, that was a huge deal
So
because like, well, you can't do that, man. He's like,
yeah.
watch me
Yeah.
take it down.
As much as people say that they don't want to acknowledge it, um, I think when you're working in the police department, there's some comfort that it's on the roof. Like,
Yeah,
okay, we've got this ace up our sleeve, and if we really need to ever use it, we can use it.
right.
And when they turn it on, Batman does show up, so it's not
Yes,
like a thing. It's
almost
just
too quick. He's like, done right there.
pow, hello.
Yes.
But a lot of times they just have it, I think, as in the back of their mind, like, okay, if this gets beyond us, or if they're doing some detective work, and they're like, well, I don't know who's out there, and then they're like, oh, it's it's the Penguin.
No.
As soon as that kind of comes up as a topic, I think in their mind they're probably like, turn the signal on. Like,
Right.
this is
Right.
beyond us. This
Hmm.
is like, it's a thing that's just beyond you.
Sure.
Um,
And
and one of the sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, and it was cool. Like when they really needed somebody that wasn't Batman but had a lot of experience, they went to Harvey Bullock at one point. He
Yes.
comes back because I guess he was kind of asked because he did some shady dealing on kind of like a corruption side of things where he paid off or somebody or whatnot, or he had to pay somebody for for more information or something like that. He had to use his underworld connections to get
Yeah,
something done. When
Bullock was like that weird anti-hero
yeah, absolutely.
detective. He
Yeah.
was great in the animated series. He was really great.
Yeah. So, but going from what he was in the animated series to this, he kind of really fell on some hard times after he left. Like he kind of became more of a drunk,
Yeah.
and really just this like kind of got a little scummy, and he was just really down on himself because he couldn't be working anymore.
Well, I
He
mean,
didn't know
what
what else
else?
to do.
Yeah, what else was he qualified? I mean,
Yeah,
that's who he is. He's just
exactly.
the tough beat cop. And
Yeah, so when he actually becomes finds a way to become useful again, he's like, okay, fine, I will help. I'll be the kind of like the not contact, but like just consultant. There you go.
the
He like being the consultant.
yeah. He's like, I'm gonna get answers. Don't
Yep.
ask me how,
Yep.
but I'm gonna get them for you.
Right. They
Don't-
still, but they still ground him with that same humor, just that rough humor, and I love that. Capturing that was so good. We also do get to see like so a few people from Batman's Rogues Gallery and things like that, like Catwoman. That was really cool to bring her back in. Huntress was in here. We went back
oh,
to
that's right.
her
Yep.
her mob family. We got some ties in with actually the Flash's Rogue Gallery. Some Dr. Alchemy. I didn't know who he was, but I was like, hey, that's kind of a cool thing. Like he comes
Neither
over.
did I, but they played him off really well too.
Yeah,
I
he
liked
just
this
fit
his
in really
storyline.
well. Like he isn't like a over the top villain, but he's kind of very scummy and like all the Batman's Rogue Gallery. So hey, he fits in great. He gets in a vet. Well, and it's kind of like a lot of Batman's villains, or especially the Joker, they fell in a vat of acid. Hey, we don't want to. We already told the Joker story. We're gonna do something else.
Yeah.
We're gonna go over here and take this weird Doctor Alchemy guy out and kind of see where that goes.
And then was it the Black Spider? Is that what it is?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that was weird.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was a
I
little
think I don't
weird.
know if that was an original one or where he comes from, but that was interesting. Trying to give like this regular guy like this weird costume he just finds, or Firefly. That
Yeah.
was like somebody found a Firefly costume that he bought off the internet.
Well, and the interesting thing about that was, so Black Spider, yeah, he got shot and everything like
Yeah.
that, and the police are collecting evidence, and one of the characters, Corrigan,
Yes,
is not introduced, but you start seeing that he's
it's reoccurring.
right off the bat.
Yeah,
He was like, okay,
you see his name coming back.
yes, like Corrigan was a big, so he is sort of like the linchpin, corrupt,
yes,
slimy cop,
Yeah.
and he fits all of those
sure.
tropes that you would imagine.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you kind of wonder just how dangerous he can get, which turns out to be very dangerous. But
Yeah,
he's selling.
He takes all the
things.
evidence.
Yes,
Yeah,
and he sells them, and then he like charges cops to like do cover-ups and stuff too. So
yeah.
he's almost like the new version of Bullock, is how I saw him. Because
Interesting.
like Harvey Bullock, like he would pay off a mobster to get information, right?
Sure.
Well, this new guy sells evidence, and he charges people to like
Cover up.
cover-ups.
Yeah,
And so
the
he's
villains to cover up, or
kind of doing it
yeah.
on that side too. So
Mhm.
but he's more techie. I mean, he's selling things online and stuff like that. So I don't think
Yeah.
Bullock would do that.
No, I think it's almost like one step closer, or things like that. Absolutely. We also get to see like Poison Ivy, but I almost wish that she was more of a featured villain, or more purposeful besides this one shot, but that's okay.
Yeah,
What
'cause-
she did was great.
Yeah, I mean, I see her more as like a normal person,
Yeah.
where some of the others are like,
And
well
she's more
beyond.
environmental justice and things like
Yeah.
that. So it was all right story, but we do get to see her. So it was almost like all these characters that he's using for villains or heroes or things like that. They're almost like cameo appearances.
Right. Like, hey, I'm gonna write this story that doesn't have to have them, but it's cool that they pop in.
Yes.
And then it leads into the Dead Robin story.
Yeah, that's probably a good note to end on. Absolutely. I think so. The Dead Robin story we were kind of hinting earlier in the show where they find a dead Robin. Or actually, no. Yeah, I think it starts out. Yeah, because that's part two. Yeah, Dead Robin just kind of falls out of a building. Boom,
Yeah,
dead.
they find a boy in the Robin
Robin
costume,
costume.
and of course the police are like, "Oh boy!"
Yeah, they're like,
oh,
does Batman know? I don't know. Do you think Batman knows? I don't know. Gonna tell him? I ain't gonna tell.
try to step back from it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Or they kind of like, we gotta play this out. When do we get them involved? And so they're kind of doing that, and they find out it's just ordinary boy
But
or a 15-year-old guy.
The cool part with that too was like, number one, he's obviously in a costume, and sometimes some of the other ones were in costumes, and the cops were like, "Oh gosh, another costume," but then
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh boy,
Yeah.
it's the Robin,"
Right.
and they do question like, "Is this his Robin?"
Yes.
And there was a really funny, I don't know if I kind of bookmarked some things, but there was one really funny one like, well, maybe he just committed suicide, and
Yeah, like what?
and one guy goes, well, he does work with Batman. So it was like,
Yeah.
oh geez, but the Justice League, I'm sorry, not the Justice League,
Titans.
the Titans show up.
Yeah, I was
And
like, all
that
right,
was
but-
cool. That
Yeah.
was really cool.
Because that's paying attention to continuity to
Yep.
his Robin's
It's like
history.
a crossover, but not,
Yeah, absolutely. And they're only, again, like we said, like a couple pages, but they're very purposeful.
But the way they did a good job was they sort of walked the Titans into the police department,
Yeah.
and the officers had different reactions to each
Yeah.
of them. And then what was it? Starfire came in.
Oh
And like,
yeah,
no one-
and all like the guys like, whoa.
yeah, no one could even talk. Even
Even
the girls.
Renee, yeah, even Renee's like,
But
okay.
like Raven was like spooky and
Yes.
like freaking everyone out. And so it's just, I like those moments in comics where everyone is reacting differently to the situation.
Right.
You can't imagine everyone to just react the exact same way.
Mhm.
Because each character, each comic book character, sort of has that gravitas that should be different,
Absolutely.
and they've played on that a little bit in some like other DC comics where like Plastic Man and like
Yeah.
Wonder Woman appears, actually I think they even make that comment about Starfire is like, wow, she's gorgeous, and then one person's like, yeah, you should see Wonder Woman.
Yep.
Because it's just sort of it's that idea of gods among men.
Absolutely.
The way that people are reacting.
Yeah.
And
You should see one.
it does a good job of keeping you in the story, but then realizing that there are beings out there that are way beyond this cop level.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, there's cop level, then there's the next level up, then there's cosmic level. I mean, it's just there are superheroes that are gods among men,
Yeah.
literally.
Absolutely. And then, they both, because this was one of their collab stories that they gave the Titans dialogue that they would say. They wouldn't like go outside of, something that wouldn't fit their characters.
Oh, right.
They kept the same tone of how they would react. And the big overarching thing in the story that they did really well was the real Robin didn't directly speak to the cops.
Yes, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
So
and the cops respected his identity, like secret identity, enough to be really sensitive about it. They didn't know who Dick Grayson was or the Robin at the time,
yes,
but they knew that if they would find out that identity, that that's got to be really hush hush or keep it sensitive. So then when the crime scene photos get leaked out to the media, that was such a huge like left twist or
Yes.
right, like what? So that was it was a very huge moment because then instead of just investigating about the Robins, you also have to figure out who is leaking this information to the press.
and even Batman was like, "That's not Robin. He's in Bloodhaven."
Yeah,
like he
so
just
they're
knows.
like,
He just
yeah.
like that's where he is.
Right.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
So end of story. Okay, I guess,
Yeah, so because they needed a reputable source of who can vouch her up and who can give them the alibi if he can't himself say that to us, who's creditable.
Yeah.
So it kind of answers all those questions that you never thought to ask.
And then he meets Stacy on the roof. That part was cool too.
Yeah,
It's like
yep,
Stacy
yep.
was just like, that's where her character is this cool little buffer on the side. Like she has no she has no role to play. She has no like narrative to
No, she's
do.
a
She's
still a supporting
yeah,
character.
but she's like
The
in
ex
that
machina,
storyline,
yeah, or
yeah, in
yeah.
that storyline, all the cops are there saying, "Oh, we're detectives and we're,"
Yeah.
and then you have everyone else, and then you just have her being like, "I know the truth," but
Yes.
she likes to just sort of keep that to herself because um, whether they were giving her the time of day earlier or not, she just
Mhm.
feels like, "Well, I know what's going on," and she kind of like empowers herself with that.
Yeah.
Like that was cool.
Well, and I think she is the one that was the most purest or the most innocent out of all of them because of, who she is and what
Yeah,
role
she's
she
not
has.
corrupted and
Yeah,
stuff.
she's
Right,
not
right.
corrupted. She's not in the trenches. She's not in the field so much. Um, so she can be this outside perspective looking on everything. And that's an important role to have, especially in the story of detectives, hard,
Yeah.
hard chaos and everything. It's really good to have that character just kind of outside of everything.
And so, not to spoil it,
Yeah.
but because I don't want to, but there are moments in here where you get everyday people that do horrendous crimes, and they are doing it when the cops interrogate them. They say they're
Yes.
doing it to be part of Batman's world, like be part of the super
Yeah.
villain world. Like there's
Yeah.
people who
There was one character that was like
they
that. Yeah.
want to be a supervillain. So they're like,
Right.
what do I have
Have
to
to
do
do
to
to
get
get on
my
Batman's
yeah, I
radar.
want to get my name on the list. I want people
Yeah.
to think like, oh, Mad Hatter. Oh wow. They want their name
Hmm.
as part of that. And again, that kind of they toy with it a little bit of like, if there's just people, instead of just doing regular crimes, they're trying to do sensational crimes because they want to be involved with Batman and his supervillains. Well,
Sure.
now it turns into, Batman, are you creating these villains?
Yeah.
You
Like we
know,
started out
like we
is
started out,
yeah.
that's exactly what they play on a little bit. They don't go into it too much, but as a reader, you're thinking about it like, yeah, I mean, that's sort of one of the narratives that are always kind of brought up, is that, does Batman create supervillains, or do supervillains
Yeah.
feed Batman?
Batman.
Like, is it the other way?
Yeah.
Which way is it?
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know. Kind of after reading this, I think it's kind of Batman who feeds the villains.
yeah, I mean,
I'm
he
gonna be
does.
honest.
He adds that crazy factor that they're just, the cops are doing what they're supposed to do. And actually, if you took Batman out of this, it'd be
Yeah.
a good cop story.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
but Batman being involved, yeah, does add this like weirdness to it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, what were I guess if you had to pick one story, 1 to 2 stories out of this, what were some of your favorites?
I mean, I really, really, really like the beginning with Mr. Freeze, just because
Yeah.
I think that he is such a good villain that isn't used very much.
Sure.
I really like the Two Face story, because Two Face is one of my favorite villains. Um, and I thought they did him justice. And that's, a lot of the storylines in here.
Yeah, those two
Um,
are like they're really hard to write, I would
yeah,
think.
like they do them justice, and that's what it is. And then they have some rando guys in here, which is cool to see. Like, you never know what's going to happen, but for the most part, being a cop in Gotham, you get the idea that every single day is just wacky, way out
Yes.
there. Like, it's going to break you no matter how tough you are.
Right.
And there are moments too where they even comment. They're just like, "Hey, this isn't Metropolis. Like, you just have to put up with, Gotham is a terrible place."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I really like the Two Face story. I also just really like the Dead Robin story. I just
Yeah.
thought that was really well laid out. And that's probably one of the standout stories that people will always point to, is, "Hey, this Dead Robin story was really good."
Sure.
Um, and then, of course, the way that they end this book, which we won't tell you,
We won't.
but it's just a perfect ending to this run. It's just,
Yeah.
I think, setting the tone and keeping that tone there's no other way to end it.
And then
There just
it
wasn't.
makes you want to see what either A, these characters did, or B, just keep reading more about Batman's world after that point.
Yeah, I mean they could um in a really slick, cool way, they could turn this into a great TV show.
Yeah, I think
But
it's been
it
always
would be
picked up, but
so
nobody, yeah,
it would be so tough to not venture off of this. You have to stay within these. You have to stay on this railroad. But
yeah,
like people, they would want to be like, all right, now today we're gonna, take to the skies with Superman. It's like, no, you got to stay with the police department.
right.
So that's always the temptation when like
Yeah.
they make
And there's been so many
TV shows.
attempts to do that, but then, when they did Gotham, it was more about James Gordon and young Bruce kind of took that over.
Yeah, it was like
Or,
origin
yeah,
stories.
the
or,
Gotham Knights was some weird, what happens when Batman's gone, Titans, what happens when Batman's retired or dead.
Well, like
or
even the Supergirl, like there was
Supergirl, yeah.
they started really ramping up the actual like Supergirl fighting supervillain storyline,
Yeah,
and they kind of got away from her just being like a normal
sure. Or Batwoman,
suburban
even.
person or
Yeah.
whatever,
I
yeah.
mean, Batman's more ordinary. She has more cast to play with, but it was still like, okay, when's the superheroics going to happen?
Right.
You really have to establish like really good detectives and really strong detectives as well if you're going to do it.
Yeah, and that's what this story does do well. It's like these are the detectives. This is the PD. Yes, there's superheroes out there, but you're not reading this for that.
No.
You're really reading it for them, and the characters
Yeah.
are done really well.
Sure.
Of course, we're a big fan of Brubaker. We're a big fan of
No,
Greg
Greg
Rucka.
Rucka,
We're
yeah.
a big fan of Michael Lark's art. I mean, it's just a really it's a easy read, quick read.
Yes, absolutely. The pace is really fast.
Mhm.
So sometimes trying to slow yourself down to absorb what's happening is important because you're like, oh, it goes really fast, but you're like, you got to kind of absorb like the importance of what's happening and just like, whoa, okay, somebody just got frozen half their body.
Yeah.
Or, hey, Joker's really going after these people. Or they're going to Arkham. Arkham's like still, even though Batman considers it like, oh, they kind of go in and out, he's busting in there anyway. God, Arkham is still a scary place to go to. You don't just, oh, hey, we're gonna skip down to the insane asylum.
And my parting thought here would be, if you really did like this story, if this is your first reading of Ed Brubaker, a lot of his series, his writings, even Greg Rucka's writings, they're very similar to this. So if you really did like this kind of pacing and storyline and sort of slow build of suspense and resolution, their criminal series and Greg Rucka does.
He does a great Wonder Woman. He did a
Lazarus.
Batwoman. He did Old Guard. He did Lazarus. They're both still writing like No Tomorrow. Lois Lane, Enemy of the State was really well received. And they're both really just going to keep going. Definitely writers just to always keep a watch out of like what they're doing and just picking it up.
Yeah. And this one is great reflection of what you're going to find when you read some of their other stuff.
Yeah. And just to see them both, now they're both, doing their own thing, but, in a time and space when they had the opportunity to collab, this is what they could accomplish. And it's one of the best non-Batman omnibus out there. DC is probably one of the best DC omnibus, honestly.
Yeah, it's always in like a top 10 Omni run, so it's very, very popular.
Yeah, it's the Eisner and Harvey Award winning series. And it just got reprinted, I think this came out, the reprint came out last year.
That's
so
true.
It's more easy and attainable to get. So we definitely encourage you to pick it up, or it can be read digitally as well. Wherever you can find it or get a hold of it, read it, we recommend it. Any closing remarks?
No, just this is still one of my favorites, and it was worthy of a second read, which is how I judge a lot of books. Is very, very good.
Absolutely. Definitely one to keep on the shelf and revisit. Or just share it with other friends and hopefully they return it.
Pass it on.
All right. This has been another great episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is your host, Andrew Gaudiano.
And Chris Ramos.
Signing off.
Goodbye.